This is a spoiler warning. The following video will contain spoilers for Doctor Who Rosa. So if you haven't seen the episode yet, go and watch it now, and then come back here later. Unlike a standard period drama, Doctor Who's unique format allows characters from the past to interact with characters from the present, thus providing social commentary that is relevant to our lives today. Historical stories depend on this interaction in order to be interesting, even so-called pure historicals, where only the Doctor, the TARDIS and the companions are the incongruous sci-fi elements. This idea was at the heart of this week's episode, and it's why Rosa was such a success. When the Doctor and her friends find themselves in Montgomery, 1955, two worlds quite literally collide, with the past being presented as just as deadly and alien a setting as the planet Desolation. It's a world away from what Ryan, Yaz and the audience are used to, making for challenging viewing at times, but never verging into melodrama. What's so tragic about this story is that the Doctor and her friends are powerless to change history. In the climactic bus scene, they can only watch on in horror as Rosa is subjected to verbal abuse and arrested. As a viewer, it was an uncomfortable scene to watch too, with Graham speaking for us all when he says, "I don't want to be a part of this." Yet he has to be. Like the Doctor and her friends, we're all inadvertently part of history, whether we like it or not. That's why this scene is so powerful. It forces us to face up to the fact that racism is a human problem, and that it's ingrained in our past as well as our present. Because we are all, directly or indirectly, guilty of turning a blind eye to injustice. We're all familiar with the feeling of being unable to make a stand. Despite this, however, the episode's message was ultimately one of hope. It reminds us that, though we can't change the past, we can learn from it and make the future better. This applies not only to Yaz, Ryan and Graham, but also, perhaps most importantly, to us, the audience. Because like any good historical story, Rosa strives to educate its viewers, and it does so in style. Cleverly, the Rosa Parks story is integral to our understanding of the plot. Even if you weren't familiar with it to start with, it's impossible to watch this episode and not know who Rosa Parks was or what she did by the end of it. As well as the bus scene itself, dramatised poignantly at the episode's end, I really appreciated the simple scene in the motel in which the Doctor and her friends summarise what they know so far about Rosa. It was reminiscent of a classroom situation, with the Doctor taking on a teacherly role. She even had a whiteboard pen. A clear metaphor for how Doctor Who strives to educate its viewers. Furthermore, there's also a deeper, spiritual message of hope at the heart of this episode, as I've already mentioned. This was encapsulated beautifully at the episode's end, when the Doctor and her friends looked out at asteroid 284996, also known as Rosa Parks. I also really liked how real-life footage of Rosa Parks receiving her Congressional Medal was used to ground the episode's events in the real world. Rosa Parks was the star of this episode, even giving it its title, and I thought the way she was presented truly honoured her legacy. Despite being British and not American, actress Finette Robinson did a fine job in the role, giving a performance that was thoughtful and understated. Add to this some top costume and makeup work, and overall, Doctor Who's version of Rosa Parks was very convincing. The other main guest character and the villain of the piece was Krasko, played by Josh Bowman. Essentially, he was a racist from the future who had come back in time to try and change history in order to prevent the civil rights movement. As a villain, I found Krasko a bit hit and miss, but more hit than miss. I liked how his evil intentions tied into the main plot, instead of his plan being completely unrelated. I also liked how he was reminiscent of the meddling monk from the classic series, making small changes to time that would have big repercussions. His neural block was sort of convenient to the plot, but the idea of a villain that can't kill was, nevertheless, quite neat, as was his temporal displacement weapon. It would have been nice to see more of this character, though having said that, I'm glad he, as a sci-fi element, didn't overshadow the main, historical plot. He wasn't the best villain ever, but for the purpose of this episode he was good enough, coming across as genuinely unpleasant and sinister. Another highlight of the episode for me was Seiga Nakanola's score. I haven't really talked too much about his scores in these reviews so far, partially because, so far, they've been quite subtle and atmospheric. This week, however, I'd like to draw attention to Rosa's theme, an 8-note motif used throughout the episode in a number of contexts. It appears in lots of early scenes, often heard in a minor or modal key, played by French horns or sinister cellos. It was used most prominently, and most effectively, to underscore Rosa's heroic actions at the end of the story, with a swelling string variation following in the final TARDIS scene. It was a beautiful theme, giving the story real emotional weight and a stronger sense of cohesion. And I'm in two minds about the use of the pop song Rise Up in this story. I appreciate that it's a significant song to use because of the Black Lives Matter movement, and it has grown on me since first watch. It does work. However, there's also an argument to be made that the bus scene would have worked better with an orchestral score, or even with no music at all. Nevertheless, I liked how the closing credits were scored with something other than the famous theme tune, which would have felt a bit out of place, I think. And I thought Akinola's soundtrack merged into the song well. Like the best Doctor Who historicals, Rosa's main goal was to educate its viewers as well as to entertain them. It was a thought-provoking retelling of the Rosa Parks story through a Doctor Who lens, drawing together past, present and future attitudes towards racism in order to deliver a powerful message about struggle and injustice. As usual, the regular cast were on top form, and Vinette Robinson did a superb job at bringing Parks to life. Seiga Nakanola's score was one of the highlights of the episode for me, really helping to give it emotional weight. Overall, Rosa blew me away. As an example of a historical story, or even a Doctor Who story full stop, it was nothing short of perfect. And before I draw this video to a close, here are some random thoughts about the episode that I couldn't fit into my main review. Despite being quite a heavy episode, this was probably the funniest instalment of Series 11 so far. The Doctor's gag about being Banksy was definitely my favourite, delivered wonderfully by Jodie Whittaker. Why did Krasko's suitcase bear the initials GFB? Perhaps it didn't even belong to him. Could the initials refer to a relative of James F. Blake, the bus driver, or be part of a bigger mystery? On the subject of Krasko, I appreciated how through his character we got a few nods back to previous eras. He owned a vortex manipulator like Captain Jack, River Song and Missy, and had spent some time in the same Prisoners River, the storm cage facility. Perhaps they bumped into each other at some point. This episode had a little less to say about the series' overarching theme of family, though it's worth noting that Grace's legacy continues to be felt in the show, something I really like. The detail about her Spirit of Rosa t-shirt tied into this story nicely without feeling forced or tenuous, and Graham's moment of reflection in the motel was executed brilliantly. I'm beginning to really like how the police box side doors are now part of the TARDIS interior. In certain shots, it's as if the Doctor and her friends are inside an actual police box. I love this shot from the end of the episode, where the police box walls are juxtaposed with a view of space. It encapsulates the impossibility and wonder of the TARDIS. And that final scene might just be one of my favourite Doctor Who moments of all time. The writing, direction and score all work together to convey a sense of sadness, but also overwhelming hope, and the asteroid is a beautiful symbol of Rosa's legacy. I've watched this episode twice now, most recently with my uni flatmates, who, I'm told, have now subscribed to this channel. However, on my first watch I was joined by my family, and in particular, my granny, who was alive when the events of this episode took place. The reaction from both these groups was overwhelmingly positive, and rightly so. It's probably my personal favourite episode of this series so far, and one that will, no doubt, be talked about for years to come. So, that does it for this review. I'd love to know what you thought of Rosa, so please post your thoughts and mini-reviews in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week for my review of Arachnids in the UK.